Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the High Ability Learners and Differentiation Spring Series. I'm Cheyenne Meadows, and I'm the High Ability Learning Specialist at NDE. Today, we have Kate Huff from Elkhorn Public Schools, and she's going to be talking about differentiation strategies for gifted learners. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kate.
Hey, everybody, thanks for watching and joining in. Thanks, Cheyenne, for organizing this series. I have loved the opportunity. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm wanting to share instead of present. There we go. I've loved the opportunity to watch the past presenters and learn from them as well. So thanks for putting this series together. So to start off, let's see if I can minimize. There we go. Well, let's see. There's Adam. Hi, Adam. Why is it not on speaker view? Should I switch? Do I need to switch?
On our side, it looks, we see your screen. So if you're all right with it, then
yeah, perfect. Thanks, Adam. I see you.
Problem.
That's good. All right. So differentiation for gifted learners. I will introduce a variety of books that I've used throughout this presentation. And so on this first slide, The Rigor for Gifted Learners, it's just a really great, quick, short handbook that comes from NAG. It reminds me a lot of how the NAG standards are presented, pretty straightforward. So it just reminded me of some of the core keystone elements for differentiation. So I enjoyed it. It was inexpensive and short. So that's a great resource if you're looking to expand your knowledge. So a little bit about myself. I teach at Midland University, where I help develop the program for HAL endorsements. I'm also a middle school, we call it HAIL, facilitator for Elkhorn Public Schools. And I also teach at Loyola Scholars on Saturdays, which is a program to help middle school students who come from underprivileged backgrounds be prepared for high school. Prior to that, I was a speech language pathologist for 20 years. And for 10 of those, I was also a HAL facilitator in the elementary. So it's my professional background. Today, I'm going to talk really through those who, deciding who should be part of a differentiated high ability level lesson, how to maximize those teaching and learning opportunities so that it's not something always more on a teacher's plate, but how to maximize for students and teachers, how to do it, what we've talked about, the content, process, and product, and then I'm going to share the resources that I've used in the past for differentiation. So just to begin, there are so many benefits to differentiation beyond just the academics. And I think when we really consider the needs of a gifted learner, we are able to consider that when we pull students into a differentiated group, they're also learning some independence with choice or pacing models. They're learning those really essential intrapersonal skills of habits of mind, how to work through a difficult problem, how to ask for help, how to develop interpersonal skills by seeking help from a teacher or working through with friendships. When we give differentiated assignments, we can increase engagement through passion, interest, and creativity, and it can allow our students to develop some leadership skills to bring relevance into their daily work. So the benefits of differentiation, the list is long and it's well beyond just academic rigor, which is essential and important for our students, but it's also helping them to develop those 21st century thinking skills. So deciding who needs to be part of the lesson is really the building blocks. And it's something that I know Cheyenne has talked a lot with us about through these webinars. So I won't spend long, but I think it's important just to reiterate how important having a good set of identification procedures is. When you know that you've created identification procedures with fidelity, you can feel more confident in who you're including in groups. And HAL students who are identified don't have to be the only groups who have differentiated lessons, of course, but if you have an identified student, then it's a priority to ensure they do have differentiated lessons. So some of the key criteria that all of the latest research has really outlined, and we've discussed again through the state of Nebraska, universal screening, everybody, all students should have an opportunity to be included in the verification process, to be considered for HAL opportunities. It shouldn't be simply a MAP score alone, because MAP test relies simply on your achievement score. So some students may not have had an opportunity to be exposed to certain skills and standards. And so we need to be able to allow kids to show some ability level as well. Many of the districts use COGAT, while there's other tests that can also be recommended. You want to use an inclusive criteria. So if a student scores high on an ability-based measure, it's really difficult to have a false positive for a high score. So if you have a high IQ score or a really high COGAT score, that child should probably have an automatic entry. Now, if you have a borderline score for a child on a COGAT or another ability-based measure, then considering MAP scores, achievement scores, portfolios, teacher and parent input would also be important. So it doesn't have to be a cut score that is all or nothing, but a cut score can help you to say, yes, we know these students do meet this high ability level, and then allow them, other students who may not have met that cut score, to show that they belong as having a high ability learner label as well. And then identifying students to match their specific domain has become more and more important as we differentiate our lessons. So a HAL student that's identified in math could receive math services. Sometimes you'll have a student who identifies as reading and then is pulled for math, but really struggles with that content area, and then develops a negative attitude towards HAL experiences. So it's important that we're pulling students, or we're including students in the domain where they are matching their identification. So again, using local norms is another really important aspect, because our school districts all do look different, and sometimes even our schools within our districts look different. So a lot of research will suggest that if you don't have a high population of students verifying for HAL, to consider having the top 10% be a provisional HAL, where those students are having extended opportunities for differentiation and exposure within that particular school. So I wanted to talk a little bit about MAP scores. MAP scores are such a great asset that we have now, being able to show progress for a gifted learner. You know, prior to MAP, it was like we might be able to say a student scored at the 99th percentile, but we could never really show their growth. And so every year it was 99th percentile, but again, we don't know how much growth they've shown. So I want to talk through, I know people have different varying levels of comfort with MAP. I think it's a wealth of resource to be able to not only identify which group of students might be ready for a differentiated lesson, but also to be able to help identify which lessons we could be teaching. So I'm just going to give you kind of the 101. You go to the nwea.org website, and you're going to click on the MAP growth reports. And that's where you have logged in. So then you will get a choice of several different kinds of reports. And I think it may be contingent somewhat upon whether you're an administrator or a teacher, but you can be asking in your school for these kinds of reports. So each of the reports, there's examples, and I've pulled my 4 favorites. So I'm going to go ahead and click through and talk through. So to begin, I think probably most people are familiar with the grade breakdown. They didn't have an actual example, but I think, again, most people have seen this. It lists your students. You can sort the students from high RIT score to low. And what I really do with the grade breakdown is, of course, highlight students that have already been identified. So I'm able to, for one, monitor their progress. Are they progressing? Are they achieving, you know, in those higher percentiles that we would expect an identified gifted student to achieve in their domain? And then likewise, I'm looking for students who are achieving at those really high rates who have not been identified. And then I can take a closer look at those particular students to see if they have a trend for those high achievement scores. And again, are differentiated levels of level instruction important for them in their classroom? Once you've kind of started to look at the whole grade as a whole, you can start to look at the grade or the classroom on a learning continuum. And what a fantastic chart for a discrete skill. So you can click on the learning continuum. And so, for example, the NWA shows this report. They're looking at perimeter and circumference. You can see that your top 2 students are ready for this level of instruction, where your class instruction may be falling in the middle. You have some automatic groups that you could be pulling together. You could be able to tier your lessons accordingly so that you would know. This also enables teachers to have some flexible grouping. So you might have a HAL student who's actually on grade level for this particular targeted lesson. A HAL student might be able to work through this lesson a little bit quicker than some of their peers in the classroom if they weren't familiar, or maybe even some of the independent work. But we know that these other students have already mastered those skills. And I think when we look at differentiating our lessons, it's often a concern that we're going to miss a key standard or a building block. And these MAP scores help us to have some assurance that the student has already mastered that skill and they're ready to move on. And not only are they ready to move on, but it highlights exactly what skills they would need from a standards-driven approach next. Another MAPS report that I really like, and it's similar to the last one I just showed you, is the class breakdown by goal. So you can look under each of the strands here for instruction, and then again, you have different groups that are formed. You can see that here, the top student varied from informational text, but was the top student in literature was the same as the top student in vocabulary. Of course, you can group more than one group of RIT scores together, but it gives you just a general idea of where your students are and how to make some grouping decisions. The last one that I'd like to show you, and perhaps you're also really familiar with this, but it's such a wealth of great information. When I have noticed a trend for a child, or I want to look more closely at their trend, I pull their student profile. I can look at their graph to see where they are progressing. And then under different instructional areas, I can click and it generates the report of exactly what skills they are ready to learn next. This is key and essential for planning next level steps for my gifted students, particularly students who may be in the exceptional range, and I've got to be planning multiple years ahead. So moving on, I would like to talk about how, once we have these groups established, how can we
I can on here.
how can we most
Isabella.
how can we most effectively be grouping our kids, administering grades, and developing the curriculum? So I have on our little shelf over here, the Teaching Gifted Kids in Today's Classroom. I think it's a resource that so many people are familiar with. I did recently purchase the updated version, which has some great information on MTSS. I found the revised version really to be very current. I think it's an outstanding general resource for HAL facilitators, for administrators, and for classroom teachers. It's very easy to access. There's a great list of questions and answers. It dispels myths. It's got a wonderful index. It's a really easy user guide and manual, and it's got some downloadable aspects of the book now as well. So research-based grouping models. So this particular book, this curriculum planning and instructional design, is very research-based. It's not maybe as user-friendly for, say, if you were going to do a book study with teachers, but it might be a really helpful planning tool if you had a group of HAL facilitators or administrators who were considering how your programming looks. What I loved about the book is that it pulls charts and shows the efficacy of each type of instruction. And so it's really, again, research-based, and the book is written as such. So I think that it's really, as the title says, curriculum planning, instructional design. So full-time self-contained classroom that's pulling all of your gifted kids into really a school for the classroom all day. We see that, but it's not as common. Mastery learning method reminded me a little bit more of Montessori, where as kids progress through certain skills, they go on to the next. Cross-grade grouped classes might be an example of some schools will use, for example, math. You might have a sixth grader that tests into pre-algebra who's then in a class with seventh or eighth graders who are also in that level placement. When I taught in the elementary school, our formal services began in third grade. And so we did some cross-grade grouping for some of our high-level readers. For example, some kindergartners would be reading at a higher level, and we did not have reading groups per se in most kindergarten classes because reading chapter books is really what I mean. And so we were able to cross grade groups. So the children were not formally accelerated, but they had opportunities to work with other students who were at similar reading levels from other grades. Academic pullout, I think it's become a fairly common way of administering HAL services where you may come out of a specific class. Cluster grouped classes also have become fairly common, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And then enrichment pullout classes would be like your seminar. Some districts in the past have used a model where on Wednesdays you go to HAL the entire day and you work on, extraneous activities there. I think it was important to note that if your grouping model isn't really based in research, or you're implementing it, but you really haven't followed the instructions on how to cluster group, then your differentiated curriculum that you're planning is not as effective. So these are models that will help to support the differentiated lessons that you're planning. So I think it's a common myth that cluster grouping is labeled as tracking. And Susan Weinbrenner, not only in her Gifted Kids Guide manual outlines these questions, but the cluster grouping handbook is a really nice resource for schools that are looking to implement cluster grouping and explaining how that looks. You can see the differences on this slide between tracking and cluster grouping, where tracking sets students on a path that they're unable to sway from, whereas cluster grouping still has heterogeneous classes, but it's allowing the teacher to have fewer numbers of groups. So class A might have high ability students, where class B may have gifted learners. Both classes will have high achieving students, but the teacher then doesn't have quite as broad of a range. So instead of having maybe 8 different levels, like on that map score that I showed you, they might have 4 different kinds of grouping that they could differentiate for and pull within their classroom. Cluster grouping also is not a set track. It allows extended learning opportunities for all kids in the class. And the research behind cluster grouping has shown to benefit not just HAL students, but it also benefits students of every learning level. And, I'll go back to saying, my roots are being a speech pathologist and working to differentiate. And I would never advocate that one group services should be at the cost of another group's. And as I've worked through cluster grouping, I really found there to be strong benefits for all students, as well as the teacher within the classroom. So we could do a whole other hour class or longer on cluster grouping if you're interested in it and you're looking to implement it. There are specific guidelines on how to do it effectively. Sometimes I think it's easy to sway from those guidelines if you have different higher or lower levels of numbers of gifted students in a classroom. So that's why I think accessing this handbook and really understanding when you're making class placements how to do it effectively is important. Grades becomes one of our next biggest questions, that how do we ensure kids have credit? The reality is we still deliver grades to our students. And so how are we able to help students continue to work on projects or complete differentiated work while still providing feedback ultimately to the parents? So I'm just going to go through a couple different examples. The Heathcock's Cash book offers some guidance as well. I'm going to show you that in a couple slides. But I think you can start really simply by just offering full credit for mastery. You've taken a pretest, you've shown that you know the skill, the grade is done. And then students don't have to continue to work for credit in that particular course. So one of the other questions then is, how do you keep kids motivated? I offer choices. You know, when you're finished or you're ahead, you can work on these activities that would be at your level. And I continually provide feedback. So I think feedback is essential to students. I'm going to give you feedback on this because you're always growing. We have many students who in the HAL program, as you know, that are perfectionistic. And so getting anything that's not an A back becomes very stressful for them. So just being able to accept, my job as a teacher is to make sure that you're continuing to grow, that you're not just going to be at the 7th grade writing level. And so I may be even giving you tips that I would give to college students. But that doesn't mean that you're not doing a good job. It's just allowing you to grow. It's a skill, those habits of mind that allow kids to continue to work. I also think that grading can sometimes take so much of our teacher time. I know that's something that I'm always trying to balance. How can I be a more efficient grader? Because ultimately what I want to be able to do is develop differentiated good lessons for my students. And so I like being able to give feedback, but peer grading is also an opportunity. You can set those expectations for what peers are able to share with each other. When kids are turning in certain assignments, I do set HAL expectations. I might tell them, you know, you've covered the basics, but I don't think it's HAL level work. And kids always will take it back and try again. They want to be able to set that expectation or understand. And so sometimes we have HAL students who are able to get by doing the bare minimum. So again, it's establishing that habit of mind that, you know what, this is okay work, but I think you're capable of doing a little bit more. Many schools use effort grades. And so sometimes students might work on a HAL project and they, you know, have already achieved the A for completing the class requirement, but then they're given an A for effort, or, you know what, you have consistently come without your work done, so you need to complete that. Sometimes there's just intrinsic motivation for having those choices. Contracts are shown in a lot of different books for differentiation. So if you're interested in contracts, there's lots of samples online. I don't tend to use a lot of contracts just because I feel like it's maybe one more added piece when I could have a conversation with the student about what the expectations are, or I could show them a grading rubric that we put together. When grading HAL students, it's really important that we provide them separate grades so that you know what pieces of work they've contributed. It's unfair for a HAL student to feel the burden that they've got to complete the entire project. And so they've got to be okay with walking away from a project that's not done because they're allowing their group mates to fill in their roles or their responsibilities. So that's, again, a habit of mine that we want to teach our students how to work together. But offering them that out for separate grades really helps them to be, again, accountable. I think grades are important for students at times. A great example, recently I had a discussion group with my students. We discussed upcoming essay questions, and when they turned in their essay questions, they didn't do as well as I would have expected. And I think the piece is that they were so used to being able to kind of rush through that level of assignment in class that they weren't fully engaged in listening to the information that they needed. And so right away, the kids said to me, well, can I just redo that? You know, they're in that notion. They want to be able to improve their score. And I want them to also learn that skill of, it's important to do your best work, that intrinsic motivation the first time. And so that was a time where I said, no, we're not going to redo this because you had the skills and the tools to do your best prior. But later I gave them an extra credit opportunity so they could raise their grades and ease their minds about not having an A right at that moment. So I think, as I note here, balance is important for grades, being able to help kids feel accountable. But at the end of the day, we want them to be engaged and motivated for learning. We want to be able to say, you know what, we can substitute this assignment instead of that one. We can exempt you from this while you're working on this other assignment that's at your level. It doesn't always have to be for a letter grade. It can be for the sake of learning. So, there's other times too with really simple homework, just giving a check for completion allows them to know, okay, I've done my work. I can check it because ultimately I'm responsible to know this information at the end. So I go back to that feedback. Giving students feedback on their work is essential, but it doesn't always have to come in the form of a letter grade. So curriculum programming, that curriculum book that I referenced a couple slides ago really emphasizes the importance that if you're going to be writing your own curriculum, you need to have a staff member that has knowledge and training in gifted learners, as well as staff members who've been trained on curriculum development. So it's not just about writing a fun unit that might come, because a child has already tested out, but really understanding the hierarchy of needs, of questioning, as well as understanding the next level standards, the social and emotional elements that you can also be learning and gaining while being part of a differentiated unit. So we're going to move into the what, and we're all familiar with Tomlinson's Content, Process, and Product. A particular book that I really liked sitting on this shelf is the Differentiating the Curriculum for Gifted Learners by Conklin. This is a great, a little bit longer book that really is, again, bullet pointed, laid out very user-friendly. It would be an easy to read staff book. It's a nice reminder for gifted facilitators just on key essentials for differentiation, but it also is a useful tool for classroom teachers. So I really liked this book. I think it's well written and very user-friendly. You're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, and as we go through Bloom's taxonomy, one of the essential elements for our gifted lessons is being able to develop our learning goals, which would be at the beginning of each lesson, with higher level thinking skills. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Birdseed TV. I'm going to attach my links at the end so that you can also just click these links and go. But Birdseed TV is a paid service, but it has some free lessons on cooked up differentiated lessons, how to write the goal. They're really short. They're like 3 5-minute videos, really well done. Ian Bird's always fun to listen to. So I encourage you to watch those the next time that you're having to write your learning goal for your students. But he encourages you to move beyond the make with your hands. Rather, it's how can you think with your brain? So many learning goals are written as the student must learn. Well, let's be more specific, and we could compare, we can analyze. So using these higher level questions is just a great reference for us how to write our learning goals. One thing that I did want to point out is in our gifted learning lessons, we are typically looking at the top end of this pyramid, the analyze, evaluate, create. But there are times for gifted learners that they are working at that understand and remember. And a great example of this would be, I taught Murder on the Orient Express this year to 7th graders. And that's an Agatha Christie novel that really stretched their reading level. The book has many characters, and we actually had to do a little bit closer reading together, which was a harder skill because, again, gifted readers are typically able to read so fast and understand. This text slowed us down with the higher level vocabulary. The grammar is a little bit different from the time period it was written in. And And so I had to scale back, and we did some basic understanding and remembering from the text. We did some audible reading out loud together in order for us to grow and stretch our understanding before we could really get to those higher level Bloom skills. So there are times when you've pulled a standard that is new for a gifted learner, and they need that extra time to understand and remember, but they may not need the same repetition and practice in order to gain the skill. Again, to go back to Ian Bird, most of our learning goals are going to come from that top of Bloom's taxonomy. Kaplan's depth and complexity icons are also something I think many of us are becoming familiar with or already are familiar with. I don't necessarily teach these icons. I think teaching the icons to me feels a little bit like we're teaching the higher order skill separate from actually teaching the skill. Gifted readers love these level of questions, but may not always love the icon. And I know there will be people definitely who disagree with me, so I'm just sharing my opinion. What I do absolutely love about Kaplan's depth and complexity icons are the level of questions. These are the types of questions that gifted readers love having in a reading group, or any subject matter for that matter. These types of questions can be a great framework if you're developing a unit for your students, being able to go back. The Gifted Guild, so it's Lisa Van Gemert and Ian Bird wrote this Depth and Complexity STEMS manual. It's just $5. I felt like it was worth my money. It has the STEM questions that you could be looking at for a unit to be asking. So I think that's an outstanding resource. And again, these are the types of questions that we want to be asking students, so they can have the same content as their peers in class, but it allows them to take it into further depth and complexity. So again, this is a really good resource to go over. And then last, in the area of content is this Webb's depth of knowledge. To me, it kind of combines the last two slides. You're really targeting the level 4 extended thinking. These types of words, again, are helpful in developing your learning goal, which would be the beginning of how you're developing or differentiating your lesson for your gifted learners. So in terms of the process, compacting is one of the most effective uses of differentiation, but I think we probably as educators underuse it. And I know that that's an area that I'm always trying to navigate myself. So Rice and Renzulli really highlighted the goals. You just guarantee that those standards. And we can do that back again with those MAP scores. It allows then kids to move at a pace that's equal to their ability. It's challenging and enriching. So let's pre-test or use our MAP scores to identify students that we think either are going to move through this curriculum really fast or have mastered some of this content. Then you modify the lesson. So you might have a student who has mastered 80% of a particular unit you're about to teach. Let them follow through and compact the lesson for the missed pieces. You can provide a list of alternate enrichment activities after they're completed. I think a really great and simple example of this, my son was able to be accelerated in math one year, but while he was accelerated to math class, he missed science, which was his favorite subject. And I thought, oh no, he's going to miss his favorite class. It was wonderful because he was cluster grouped with another student who was on the same movement schedule as he was. And during their math time, that would have been, so during their regular math class time, they'd already completed math work with another class. So they completed their science work, and the teacher allowed their lessons to be compacted. They were able to self-pace and move through the curriculum very quickly. And then they were required for creating lessons for the class on the content. So they became presenters. And it ended up being a really outstanding year of science class, even though they weren't in class for the majority of time. They were doing somewhat independent work that was always checked in upon. Compacting, I think another example of compacting might be how we will accelerate students maybe in middle school. They might skip over 1 or 2 years to attend a pre-algebra or an algebra course. Maybe we look at compacting some of the units that they would be missing. Like if they're missing all of their 6th grade math unit, what can we compact so that they have some opportunity to learn that during their 5th grade year if we can project that they're going to be an advanced learner? So resources, you're familiar probably with this Richard Cash, Diane Heathcock's book. Again, this is an updated book that has really nice resources. I think it might be on a lot of your shelves already. The updated version does have some downloadable forms. It's maybe a little bit more advanced, probably better for a health teacher than just the classroom teacher. I think we cannot emphasize enough that differentiated learning is different, not more. When we're taking students from a class, we have to be able to excuse them from the assignments that were in that classroom. When we're asking students to be doing double the work, they aren't as motivated to be part of those extended learning opportunities that they need, that are ensuring their exposure to higher level standards so they can continue to progress. And not only do they need them academically, but they also need them for their social and emotional benefit. And this may not even be just to be pulled. Within your classroom, you may have an extension packet. Sometimes we'll say, well, that child never does the extension packet. It's because we're expecting kids to do the extension packet after their regular work is done. So it adds more work on. What we need to do is pre-test the student, exempt them, and allow them to work on that extension packet instead. The extension packet can be available for kids when they're done as an option for work, but we shouldn't be requiring it if we haven't offered kids opportunities to be moved on from the classwork. Another example of different, not more, would be in your math class. You might have a student who is showing their standards on pre-testing and MAP to be beyond the unit. Maybe have them do the 5 hardest problems of your math assignment and then allow them to work on differentiated content and material. So again, different, not more. I think it goes back to that grading, finding ways to exempt them or give them credit for grade level work so they can be doing work at their level. So to begin reading resources, when I review different resources online, I have had a hard time finding a lot of great gifted level discussion like guides. And so I have read through some different gifted programming. I just have yet to find one series that I particularly love, that I have found to be quick and user friendly. Most importantly, I have spent time then developing my own reading resources, which I'm sharing with you on the reading resources link. I did present at NAG a few years ago these units. So I always think it's important that we are sharers. And so some of these units are a little bit more developed and clear, and other ones I might have found a resource that I liked, and I'll highlight the page numbers that I like for you to reference. So please do use these. I put suggested grades. By all means, don't feel like you need to stay within that range. But these are my sources. These are the higher level questions that I ask. And I do also at times include the basic comprehension questions because again, there's times where kids will come in, I've read this whole book, but when I ask them to tell me about it, they're missing some of the key points. So it helps them to slow down and make sure that we are comprehending the book as we go along. I did recently create a student choice novel, and I've allowed kids then to pick from their choices of discussion groups. So I have book sets for them to pick from. And then within that, I teach middle school. So I'm allowing kids then to ask different questions, or I will pose a group question. So the first question was, write a 1-paragraph summary with your group via Google Doc. They're in different class periods. That would entice your friend to read the book. Hey, you chose this novel. Tell me why it's good and why you would read it. To write an I wonder statement. I wonder, something that happened before the book, or an I wonder about something that happened coming up in the next chapters, or I wonder what I would do if I was in the story, or I wonder why this rule was created. And then they are also writing discussion questions for each other. So they have this opportunity to converse, even though they might not be in the same classroom. So that's been pretty fun. Along reading resources, one of the common questions I have from gifted readers is, do we get to read ahead? My question is absolutely. Gifted readers don't like to be told stop. So I tell them, you can always read ahead, but you can't spoil the book for the rest of us. So I encourage kids to be readers ahead. And I'm sure a lot of you can appreciate, I started the unit on Friday. Monday, I came in from cross block duty and the book was on my desk with a done Mrs. Huff note. So I have it, to differentiate, of course, my differentiated unit, which I love. I think that's outstanding. And so it was interesting. This particular boy, now today's Wednesday, he's on his 3rd book of the book choices, and he's taken comprehension quizzes and gets 100%. So he's doing the work. He's participating in his original discussion book, but he says to me, I don't have to do more work, right? I don't have to do more work. And this is as he's, again, reading a 3rd novel. And so, I say to him, no, you don't have to do more work. So it's fun that reading novels is not more work. It's something that you get to look forward to when you're working ahead. So a couple other reading resources. I know a lot of elementaries participate in Word Masters. My middle school students have actually been asking me for it, which I think is really fun. Word Masters is very challenging. Even on the blue level, I find those words to pop up in our novels all the time. I think they're outstanding words. It really is a great comparison, looking at analogies to contrast words. So if you're not familiar with Word Masters, I put the link on here. Great resource, and it's a challenging, fun opportunity. I actually had wonderful parent volunteers at my old school who helps to run Word Masters for me. And when we talk about differentiating instruction, and we talk about MTSS model, we have tiers of instruction even within our gifted learners. So for example, my highest gifted learner for reading group may participate in a pull-out reading group that also participated in Word Masters, may have Royal Fireworks, ReadWorks, and so on. But I may have really high level readers who aren't quite ready to be pulled for a gifted reading group, or maybe don't meet the verification criteria. They're great candidates to participate in the extension of Word Masters. That might be a core or an extended activity that happens in the classroom rather than a pull-out service. So that's an example of good differentiation where kids in the classroom may also choose. I had one teacher who gave it to the whole class for the first test, and then those students who wanted to continue to participate were able to, and high ability and gifted students did participate. And I always told my qualified students, you do need to participate. This is an expectation that whenever you have a learning opportunity at your level, you take advantage. So that's an example of where you can tier or differentiate your instruction. It's not gifted programming shouldn't be a one size fits all. A couple years ago, I had a great opportunity to go to the national conference, and there I learned about Royal Fireworks, Michael Clay Thompson. It's an online network. It is relatively expensive. It's a per student per year fee, which I know we tend to shy away from as educators because we like to spend our money on hard books. They do have some hard books. I have not purchased those. I would be interested to see those books and explore those a little bit more. But Michael Clay Thompson Network reminds me of maybe a fee that you might have paid for Alex Math that some districts do. I use vocabulary, grammar, and practice island. And when my students worked on those, I saw 2 times the growth expected for their projected growth. So maybe their projected reading growth goal was 6, they grew 12 points. And it was across the board. I found that vocabulary and grammar really helped our students to grow their foundations in reading. Some school districts really have a strong vocabulary, grammar, and Latin root stems part of the curriculum already. This is a wonderful opportunity that's written specifically for gifted learners. So if you're interested in that, I have had some difficulty when I go to order. Be patient with their email. Once they respond, then you get lots of information. So you can kind of go in and tell them what you're interested in. I think it could end up being about $20 per student. I was able to use some health funding to purchase that for my students in the past. It can be relatively independent or teacher-led. So it's really a nice resource, again, written specifically for gifted learners that I thought was well done. ReadWorks, you may be familiar with it. It reminds me a little bit of articles that you might see on a map test. I find it to be a nice, quick resource for comparison between articles, or if I'm looking for a particular level. It's also a great way to differentiate within the classroom, because there are times that you can assign students in class who may be struggling learners one article with a little bit more complex for your gifted readers, the same text. So ReadWorks has a lot to offer. It's free. There are comprehension quizzes that can be graded. There's a vocabulary aspect to it. So it's really a nice supplement. When you have kids working beyond a particular unit in your class, you could pull this, maybe they're beyond the poetry you're doing, you could pull poems at higher grade levels, and it's easy to search. So ReadWorks, great. Logic puzzles, your standard boxes where, Michael maybe eat, vegetables on Friday, but Sally, doesn't eat cake, and you have to fill in the X's and O's to figure out where they go. Logic puzzles have been shown to really boost reading skills because you have to reread those clues. Kids love those. I have them go in spurts where they come to my room. I usually just have packets available. They're open again to any student that wants them. So when you have students that want those extension opportunities, or those HAL kids that are done and your other ones are still working, those are a nice way to engage your brain that kids really enjoy. Battle the Books, Golden Sower Club keeps our kids reading, great opportunities. And then last but not least, having a book in your desk. I mean, that is the easiest differentiation of all, right? Sometimes we forget about that option. And it's just so important. That can be one of the things that is most important for our kids. They get their work done so they can get that book out and read it. Sometimes we have to get them to put the book in the desk so they're getting their other things done. Okay, on to math. I would just like to talk a little bit about what some of my math programming looked like prior. I don't currently teach math, but when I did, and how I was able to tier some of that instruction for gifted learners. So again, the math instruction was not a one-size-fits-all program. I had a few students who were working 4 and 5 years beyond their math placement who qualified for and needed formal acceleration. Therefore, they were coming to a class at a higher grade level to get their math instruction. I talked a little bit earlier about that kind of gap year when we have 5th graders who we anticipate will be taking, maybe skipping a 6th and 7th grade level math for pre-algebra. So I started to teach students their 6th grade level math when they were in 5th grade. So it was a larger group. I had a larger population of house students that qualified. So they were allowed to have really a full class acceleration. And because they were all gifted learners working at that level, we were able to go through a relatively quick pace where I compacted some of the 5th grade curriculum, but really implemented that 6th grade curriculum. In an ideal world, I would have compacted 4th and 5th grade math, which would have allowed them to then compact maybe a 6th, 7th grade, so they were ready for pre-algebra come 8th. This doesn't end up lending itself to tracking because kids are still able to be entered at any point. It's just allowing the students who we know may be ready to move at a little bit quicker pace and to receive some further instruction on some of those foundational skills. Um, Additionally, I had some students who came for pull-out math units. So within that 5th grade, some kids weren't ready to be accelerated into a 6th grade level math, but they were still gifted level learners. So they would come to do higher level thinking with me, creative problem solving. All students had access to con mappers, and I've seen different online forums for math. The data from my students was showing that the con mappers usually showed about a third more growth than the students who had the exact same instruction with other math technology outside, if that makes sense. So if a student was expected to grow 10 points, a student who may be in accelerated math might grow 20 points, but a student who also participated in con mappers grew 30 points. I find con mappers to be really outstanding. It's free, it's online, it is individualized because you enter your individual students' scores, and then it gives them lessons related to their map. And so it's directly linked to the types of questions that they're working on. Fermi Math is an out-of-the-box thinking and problem-solving league, which allows kids questions like, how many rubber ducks will fit into a gym? I could probably, again, talk to you for an hour about Fermi Math. It's a great program. I have used some parent volunteers to help manage that time, but it was an activity that kids looked forward to getting their math done so they could participate. And then 5 hardest problems, as I said, we have kids that we know are beyond this math, complete this, the 5 hardest, instead of doing 20 or 30 practice problems, doing a basic homework check. And then with my gifted learners, I usually give a 20-minute homework limit. Kids, look me in the eye and tell me that you gave me your best work for 20 minutes, and then you can close the book and get on with other activities in your day. I really don't want to see my perfectionistic students spending 3 hours on a homework assignment, in tears because they've rechecked their math problems 5 times. So I'm trying to develop some healthier habits of mine. But as you can see, one student may be coming just for pull-out math units, while another student might be multiple grades ahead, also in that pull-out math unit, but has also received compacting curriculum. So it's helping to find our kids a differentiated tiers of instruction within the gifted programming. I've listed these resources that you can click on. Kids do like math competitions. There's a few listed there. I think we always have to consider that a placement in a math course, kids may also have needs beyond that placement. Our map data helps us to identify that, and as well as pre-testing. Gifted kids who are placed in, again, like a 6th grader who might be in an 8th grade class may be capable of faster pacing. And so if we have larger numbers of kids in certain grades, depending on your district size and your HAL numbers, cluster grouping does recommend that you put those students together. So if you have enough students, especially like at a middle school level, you allow them to be placed into a class for reading or for math for quicker pacing, which again doesn't go back to tracking because that information is based on all of the assessment data and allows other entry points for students. We've talked about the 5 to 10 most. I think one thing that some of my top math students can be missing is ability to be creative in math, thinking outside of the box, as well as to have some collaborative group skills. And so providing those kinds of opportunities, like with Fermi Math, to me was like when I think of math as a 3-legged stool. The standards is one leg, while the creativity and group skills is another. And then out of the box level thinking, novel problem solving that maybe they haven't had instruction for is the 3rd leg. That can lead to some of those growths and habits of mind, how to persevere when you're frustrated. So those are my math sources. I don't know if I should admit this, but on spring break, I was coming to watch the Tamara Stambaugh presentation, and I came the day late. So I blame it on spring break date. So I apologize that I missed it, but I know these are great resources. My colleagues are raving about them. Here is the link to some already pre-made differentiated units. If you were like me and you regret missing that day, here's that link. Unit studies, science has great map data, pre-testing, allowing independent studies, allowing kids to select topics. Again, there's so many different ways that kids can show what they know. Sometimes they will suggest it to you, so you don't have to be creating the lesson. History Day and Future Cities are two projects, probably more on the social studies ends, that kids will be working on throughout the year. I have kids who will be so motivated to complete classwork because they might have a table in the back of the room that allows them to tinker or work on future cities and progress. It allows the gifted students the differentiation they need, and other students in the class who are interested can also participate. So a great use of differentiation there. All courses, again, so many ways for kids to show what they know. I love these examples from the book. Flipgrid is a great example of where kids can share what they know. Zoom, if you are in a school that has very few gifted kids, consider teaming with another HAL facilitator who has similar numbers and allowing you guys to Zoom for a larger group so that you're maximizing your instruction time. Maybe that could be a good that came out of all of our remote learning this past year. Flipped classroom is when you have presented your materials ahead of time. Digital badges are another motivating thing. I know I work for my digital badges on my smartwatch all the time, so you can create the same for your students. GimKit, my kids, when they knew I was presenting today, they said, make sure the teachers know about GimKit. That's their latest favorite. It's like Kahoot or Quizlet, only better, they say. So if you're not familiar, it's super easy. It's starts out free. I think it may eventually have like a $5 cost. I'm still in the free mode because I just implemented it, but kids love it. Variety of topics already set for you. These other lists, problem-based learning, Genius Hour, Makerspace, we could do a whole presentation on each of those, but if you're really interested, those are awesome opportunities for differentiation. I also didn't get a chance to talk a lot about mentors. I know that many schools are looking at developing mentor programs, and that can be not only one-time check-ins, it can be ongoing mentorships, and it can also be student-to-student mentorships, which provide highly engaging opportunities for kids. Robotics is also one of those activities that you can have on the back table of a room, allowing kids that opportunity to go and tinker, which motivates them to be at school and complete their work. So having opportunities like that, I think, are excellent. Here's the sources. So if you saw some of those books that you're interested in, here's the complete reference. And that's the end of my presentation. I think I did pretty good on time. Yeah, it's 3:59. So I love getting emails. You are always welcome. Please feel free to use any of the units that I've shared and created. I know how long it can take to create a unit. So if it benefits you, please take advantage. And if you have questions about it, let me know. And make sure you complete this survey, letting us know how you are liking the webinar series. And last but not least, I did use Slides Go templates. If you've never used them, super fun. They're free. You just most of them are free. There's also a premium membership. This was a free one, but anyways, the template comes free. And so if you have to make Google presentations, those can be fun, or they do PowerPoint too. So thanks everyone. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Kate. If you guys have any questions, we'll be on for a few more minutes. And yes, even if you're watching this on recording, please go and fill out that survey. And thank you so much for coming.
Can you put the